Hello and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy chilling bedtime stories, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment below. Your thoughts and reactions mean a lot, and they help this channel bring you more late-night tales that creep into your imagination before you sleep. Now, let's move into tonight's story, Voices Over the Baby Monitor. It was late November in Chicago, the kind of night when the wind rattled the old wooden frames of houses and sent dry leaves scraping along the sidewalks. Inside a modest two-bedroom apartment on the north side, Emily and Daniel Foster were trying to settle their 6-month-old daughter Lucy to sleep. The monitor sat on the small bedside table in their room, a faint green light blinking with each shift of sound from the nursery down the hall. At first it was the usual, soft baby breaths, a tiny whimper, the shuffle of blankets. Emily was just about to drift off when a low murmur came through. She frowned, nudging Daniel. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Daniel rubbed his eyes, listening. For a few seconds there was silence. Then, unmistakably, a voice crackled through the static. Not Lucy's, not theirs. It was a man's voice, distant, like someone speaking from another room. Emily sat upright, her heart racing. Someone's in the house. Daniel tried to stay calm, but his hand tightened on the edge of the blanket. He leaned closer to the monitor. This time there were two voices, layered over each other, one male, one female. The words were fragmented, carried with interference, but they sounded like a conversation. "Don't let them know. She's awake now." The couple stared at each other, wide-eyed. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the dresser and crept into the hallway. Emily followed a few steps behind, clutching her phone, ready to dial 911. The nursery door was slightly ajar, and pale light from the night lamp spilled into the hallway. Lucy was lying quietly in her crib, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's grip tightened on the bat as he scanned the room. No sign of anyone. But then, from the baby monitor still in Emily's hand, the voices returned, clearer this time, like they were standing right next to Lucy. "Don't cry, little one. They can't see us." Emily's breath caught. She felt the temperature of the room drop, a sharp chill crawling across her skin. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, "This isn't possible." They stayed frozen for a moment, neither daring to move as the voices continued to murmur softly through the static. Emily's hand trembled as she turned down the volume, but the voices did not fade. They remained steady, whispering with that same unnatural cadence, as if whoever was speaking was not bound by the distance between the nursery and the bedroom. The sound wasn't just inside the monitor anymore. It felt as though the words were seeping through the air of the apartment itself, wrapping around them in the dim glow of the nightlight. Daniel took a slow breath, stepping further into the nursery. Lucy blinked up at him with wide, glassy eyes, calm but oddly focused, as though she could see something in the corner of the room where no one stood. Her small fists opened and closed against the blanket, her lips moving as if she were about to babble, but instead she simply stared. "Lucy," Daniel whispered, lowering the bat and brushing a hand across her cheek. The voices stuttered in static, then one of them spoke more clearly than ever before. "She hears us, she knows." Emily let out a strangled gasp. She grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him away from the crib. "We need to get out of here. Now." Daniel hesitated. His rational mind told him it had to be interference, maybe some kind of cross signal from another baby monitor in the building. But the look on Lucy's face and the chill that filled the nursery told him this was something far stranger. Still, he tried to ground them in reason. "It's probably just a neighbor's monitor bleeding through," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily shook her head. "No, Daniel, no neighbor talks like that. And why would it sound like they're right here in the room with her?" He didn't answer. He just took her hand and led her back into their bedroom. The monitor still hummed, that eerie static lingering even when he switched it off. It was as if the silence had grown heavier, too deliberate, too watchful. That night, neither of them slept. Lucy finally drifted off after another half hour, but Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, straining her ears for the sound of voices that might return. Daniel stayed propped against the headboard, the bat across his lap, watching shadows shift across the floor as passing cars cut beams of light through the blinds. When dawn broke, the apartment felt different, almost normal again. But Emily couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched, that something had been invited in through the device they had trusted to keep their daughters safe. Over breakfast, Emily tried to bring it up again. "We can't just ignore this. Something's not right." Daniel sighed, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Look, I'll call the landlord. Maybe there's some interference from the wiring. Maybe it's a short in the system. Something logical." Emily's eyes burned with exhaustion. "And if it's not?" He looked at her, then at Lucy in her high chair, her little fingers tapping rhythmically on the tray as she stared at the empty wall. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his tone sounded hollow. That evening, after Daniel came home from work, he tried testing the monitor. He carried the receiver around the apartment, speaking into it while Emily stayed in the nursery with the transmitter. Everything seemed normal. His voice came through clearly, the static was faint, nothing out of the ordinary. But just as he switched it off and started to set it down, a voice whispered again. This time with no static, no distortion, as if someone were speaking directly into his ear. "Daniel." He froze. His throat went dry. Slowly, he turned to Emily, but she was still in the nursery, watching him from down the hall. "Did you?" His voice trailed off. "What?" she asked, tilting her head. "You didn't just say my name?" Emily's face paled. "No." The monitor let out a sharp crackle, followed by a faint laugh. A man's laugh, low and jagged, like glass being dragged across stone. From that moment on, the apartment was never quiet. Some nights, the voices were faint, only whispers that blended with the wind outside or the hum of the refrigerator. Other nights, they grew clearer, holding conversations that had nothing to do with Lucy at all. Sometimes they mentioned names neither Emily nor Daniel recognized. Sometimes, though, they spoke of things far too close to home. "She doesn't trust you anymore," one of the voices whispered to Emily one night as she lay awake. "She's thinking of leaving." Another night, Daniel woke to the monitor spitting static and a woman's voice hissing, "He's lying to you, don't believe him." It wasn't long before the couple began to unravel. Emily started keeping the monitor switched off, but even then she swore she could hear faint murmurs when she passed by Lucy's room, almost as if they were leaking out of the walls themselves. Daniel tried replacing the monitor with a newer model, but the same thing happened, sometimes even worse. The voices seemed to grow bolder, as if they knew their fear was feeding something unseen. And then came the night that broke everything open. It was just after 2 in the morning. Emily woke suddenly, not to the sound of the monitor, but to Lucy crying, loud, panicked cries that shook the walls. She leapt from bed, heart pounding, and rushed into the nursery. The air in the room was icy, her breath visible in the dim glow of the nightlight. Lucy was standing in her crib, gripping the wooden rails with tiny fists, her face red with fear. Emily scooped her up quickly, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." But then she heard it. Not through the monitor this time, not through any device. A voice, low and resonant, came from the very corner of the room. "Don't take her away." Emily froze. Her entire body went rigid as she turned her head. The shadows in the corner shifted, just slightly, like something had moved against the wall. Her scream tore through the apartment, waking Daniel, who came running with the bat in his hands. He found her clutching Lucy tightly to her chest, standing in the middle of the nursery, her eyes wide with terror. "There's something in here," she gasped. "Daniel, there's something in here with us." He didn't see anything, but he felt it. A pressure in the air, a heaviness that wrapped around his chest and made it hard to breathe. The monitor flickered to life on its own, glowing green on the dresser, and from it came a chorus of voices, not just one or two but many layered over each other, whispering, laughing, chanting in a language neither of them could understand. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm. "We're leaving. Now." They didn't even pack. They fled into the freezing Chicago night, Lucy wrapped in a blanket, both of them shaking as they drove aimlessly through the darkened streets. They didn't return until morning, when the sun was high and the city felt alive again. But even then, as they stepped back into the apartment, both of them knew the silence was temporary. Something had taken interest in them and in their child, and it wasn't going to let go so easily. That evening, Daniel reached out to a friend of his sister's, a woman named Claire who lived in Hyde Park and was known for her interest in paranormal cases. She agreed to visit the following night. When Claire arrived, she brought with her a small leather satchel filled with notebooks, candles, and a recorder. She walked slowly through the apartment, her eyes sharp and observant, as if she were listening to something far away. "It's not just the monitor," she finally said, her voice low. "That's just the door it used to get in. It's already here. And it wants the baby." Emily clutched Lucy tighter, her stomach twisting. "What do you mean it wants her?" Claire looked at the crib, at the faint indentation on the mattress where Lucy usually slept. She seemed to hesitate before answering. "Not her body. Her attention. Her fear. Her life. It feeds on her and on you both through her." Daniel bristled. "No. We're not going to let that happen. Tell us what to do." Claire reached into her satchel, pulling out the recorder. She set it on the dresser and pressed the red button. The small device hummed quietly. "If we're lucky, we'll catch its voice," she said softly. "But be warned. If it knows we're listening, it may decide to speak more directly." The apartment grew colder again as she spoke. The light bulb in the nursery flickered once, twice, then steadied. The monitor lit up without being plugged in, glowing faintly green. And then, from the recorder, barely audible at first, came a whisper. "Leave, or she will never leave me." Emily's knees buckled. Daniel caught her, holding her close, his face pale but furious. The voice repeated itself, louder this time. "Leave, or she will never leave me." Claire pressed stop on the recorder, her hand trembling. She looked at the couple, her expression grave. "You need to decide quickly," she said, "because it's not giving up. And the longer you stay here, the stronger it becomes." The room fell silent again, but in that silence was something worse than noise, an expectancy, a waiting, as if the thing inside the apartment knew it had already been heard. The apartment was silent. Pieces of the shattered baby monitor lay scattered across the nursery floor, the green light that had glowed so menacingly now extinguished for good. Emily sat on the floor with Lucy in her arms, rocking her slowly as tears ran down her cheeks. Daniel knelt beside her, his hand gripping her shoulder, his face pale and wet with sweat. Father Michael stood near the crib, holding the crucifix in one hand and the small bottle of holy water in the other. His breathing was heavy, his voice tired but steady. Claire extinguished the protective candles one by one, whispering a quiet prayer as she packed her notebook back into her leather satchel. "For now," Father Michael said, finally breaking the silence, "it's gone. But don't make the mistake of thinking this is the end. It has been weakened, driven out of this place, yet it knows you. It knows the child." Emily's arms tightened around Lucy. She whispered, her voice cracking, "You mean, it could come back?" Father Michael looked at her gravely. "Yes, may try. And if it cannot return here, it may follow." Those words left a heavy weight in the room. No one spoke after that. The only sound was Lucy's soft, steady breathing against her mother's chest. The following days felt lighter in some ways. The voices that had once echoed through the monitor, through the walls, even through the very air of their home, had fallen silent. Daniel returned to work with cautious relief, though he called home every hour to check on Emily and Lucy. Emily spent most of her time in the living room rather than the nursery, too afraid to be alone in that room for long. One evening, a week after the ritual, Daniel suggested something Emily had already been considering. "We need to move," he said simply as they sat at the kitchen table. "This apartment, it's poison for us now. Even if nothing happens again, we'll never feel safe here." Emily nodded quickly, her eyes wide with exhaustion. "Yes, I don't care where. Anywhere but here." Claire, who had kept in touch and visited twice since the ritual, agreed. Sometimes leaving the environment where the connection was strongest helps. "But," she hesitated, "if the attachment is to Lucy, you may find that changing houses isn't enough." Daniel frowned. "We'll cross that bridge if we have to. First step, we move." Within 2 weeks, they found a small house on the outskirts of the city, a brick 2-story with a small yard and quiet streets. It felt fresh, untouched, and for the first time in months, Emily felt she could breathe. On the first night in the new house, Lucy slept soundly in her crib, set up in a bright nursery painted soft yellow. Emily and Daniel stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her. Emily whispered, "Maybe this really is a new start." Daniel slipped his arm around her waist. "It has to be." They fell asleep together in their own room, the baby monitor switched off and unplugged. At 3:12 a.m., Emily woke with a start. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had nudged her awake. She turned to look at Daniel, who was still fast asleep, then listened carefully. It came again, a faint sound like whispering. Not from the monitor. Not from any device. From Lucy's room. Her heart lurched. She climbed out of bed as quietly as she could and padded down the hall, every step echoing louder than it should. The door to the nursery was half open. She pushed it gently, her breath held. Lucy was awake. She was lying in her crib, eyes wide, looking at the far corner of the room. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She was smiling. And then Emily heard it clearly. A man's voice, low and coaxing, coming from the same corner Lucy was staring at. "Hello, little one. You found me again." Emily's scream broke the silence of the house. Daniel rushed in seconds later, his face pale, his eyes darting wildly around the empty room. Lucy had begun to laugh, reaching her tiny arms toward the shadows. "No," Emily whispered, backing away with Lucy in her arms. "No, it followed us. It followed us here." Daniel grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the room, slamming the door behind them. They stood in the hallway, Lucy pressed between them, both of them shaking. The house creaked as if something moved inside the walls. A chill spread down the hallway. And then, from behind the closed nursery door, came the voice again, louder this time, not distorted, not hidden. "She belongs to us. You can't take her away." Daniel's grip tightened on the doorknob, his knuckles white. His voice cracked with anger and desperation. "What do you want from us?" The answer was immediate, clear, cold. Her attention, her life, her fear. The door rattled violently as if someone was pounding from the inside. Emily let out another scream, clutching Lucy so tightly the baby began to wail. Daniel dragged them both down the stairs, fumbling for his phone. His first instinct was to call Claire. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "Daniel? What happened?" "It's back," he shouted, his voice shaking. "We moved and it's still here. It's in Lucy's room. Claire, what do we do?" There was a long pause. Then Claire's voice, low and urgent. "You need to get out of that house. Right now. Don't argue, don't wait. Take Emily and Lucy and leave. I'll meet you." "But, Daniel," she snapped, "if you stay it will take more from her. It's stronger now. You don't have time to question me. Get out." Daniel looked at Emily, who was pale and crying silently. She nodded, already clutching the diaper bag she had snatched from the table. They rushed out the front door into the freezing night air, not stopping until they were in the car with the engine running. As they pulled away, the house stood still and dark behind them. But Emily swore she saw something, just for a moment, in the upstairs nursery window. A figure. Tall, thin, its head bent at an impossible angle, watching them leave. She turned away, burying her face in Lucy's hair, whispering over and over, "You can't have her. You can't have her." When they arrived at Claire's place in Hyde Park an hour later, she was waiting outside, bundled in a heavy coat despite the chill night wind. She ushered them inside quickly, locking the door behind them. The small townhouse felt warm, filled with books and the scent of burning sage. Claire guided them to the living room where Father Michael sat waiting. He looked tired, older than when they had last seen him, but his eyes were sharp. "I knew it might come to this," he said quietly as Emily sank onto the couch with Lucy in her arms. Leaving the apartment wasn't enough. It wasn't the place, it was the child. Emily shook her head desperately. "But why her? She's just a baby." Father Michael's expression darkened. "That's precisely why. Children are open in ways adults are not. They see things we cannot. They hear things we've learned to shut out. Something latched onto her attention, and through her, it found you." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "Then how do we stop it? Tell us what to do. We'll do anything." Father Michael leaned forward, clasping his hands together. There is a way, but it will not be easy. You'll have to confront it directly, not just drive it away but sever its tie to Lucy forever. Emily looked down at her daughter, who was finally drifting to sleep against her chest, and whispered, "Then we'll do it. Whatever it takes." Father Michael nodded slowly, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the warm, dimly lit room. "Then prepare yourselves. Because once we begin, it will fight harder than ever before." The voices that came through the baby monitor never truly left after that night. Emily and Daniel thought it was a one-time incident, perhaps some odd radio interference, though deep inside they knew it was something far more unsettling. That night, after checking every door and window twice, Daniel finally convinced Emily to try and sleep. But neither of them slept well. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the old apartment walls made their nerves snap tighter. By morning, the apartment seemed normal again. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, Lucy giggled in her crib, and for a brief moment Emily wondered if it had all been some strange dream born of exhaustion. But when she reached for the monitor, still sitting by the bed, she noticed the green light blinking even though the nursery was silent. She held it up to her ear, her heart dropping. A faint whisper slipped through. It wasn't words this time, more like humming, a tune half familiar, almost like an old lullaby. She froze, staring at Lucy across the room. The baby was looking straight back at her mother, as though she too could hear it. That day Daniel brought up the possibility of interference from nearby apartments. "Maybe someone else has a monitor or a radio frequency crossing over," he said over breakfast, trying to make it sound logical. But Emily shook her head. "You heard them, Daniel. They were talking about us. About Lucy." The couple agreed to keep the monitor unplugged during the day, only using it at night when they felt they had no choice. Still, the dread lingered. A few nights later, it happened again. It was close to 1 a.m. Emily had just managed to put Lucy down after a difficult evening of fussing and crying. She walked back to her room, collapsed onto the bed, and closed her eyes. Then the monitor came alive. Static, a pause, then voices, clearer than before. "She's asleep now. Not for long. They'll be watching again." Emily sat bolt upright, her body stiff with terror. She nudged Daniel awake, shoving the monitor at him. His face drained of color as the words continued. "You can't keep her forever. They don't understand. She belongs here." Daniel stood, gripping the bat again, his jaw clenched. He stormed into the nursery, switching on the light. Lucy was there, safe, eyes fluttering open in the sudden brightness. Nothing else. But Emily noticed something different. On the floor, right next to the crib, was a faint mark, like someone had dragged a finger through dust. There was a line, curved, almost like the outline of a half circle. She bent down, touching it, but the moment her finger brushed the floor, the monitor in her hand shrieked with static so loud she dropped it. From that night on, the voices changed. They weren't only speaking in fragments now. Sometimes they said names. Sometimes they whispered things neither Emily nor Daniel wanted to repeat. One evening, Daniel swore he heard his own name spoken, followed by a chilling laugh. The apartment itself began to feel different. Shadows seemed to move where they shouldn't. Lucy often woke up crying, staring into corners of the nursery as though something invisible stood there. Once, Emily entered the room to find her daughter laughing, not at her mother, but at the empty rocking chair in the corner, which was swaying gently as if someone had just been sitting there. They tried everything to explain it away. Daniel even replaced the baby monitor with a brand new one, hoping it was just a malfunction. But the new device picked up the same chilling voices, sometimes even clearer. The breaking point came one stormy night in December. The wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows. The couple had barely settled down when the monitor clicked on by itself. A voice spoke, calm and cold. "Emily." Her blood ran cold. She clutched Daniel's arm. The voice repeated her name again, then added, "We are here for her." Daniel grabbed the monitor, shaking it as if he could force the device into silence. Instead, the voice shifted, now sounding closer, almost as if it were inside the room. "She's ours." Lucy began to cry in the nursery. The wail cut through the storm like a knife. Emily rushed in, tears of fear welling in her eyes. She scooped up her daughter, holding her tight, whispering over and over that everything was all right, though she didn't believe it herself. And then she saw it, standing in the far corner of the nursery. A figure. Tall, thin, its face obscured in shadow. It didn't move, but she felt its gaze fixed on her, fixed on Lucy. Emily screamed for Daniel. By the time he rushed in, the corner was empty. But the baby monitor in his hand was still alive with sound, with whispers, with laughter. After that night, the couple couldn't deny it any longer. It wasn't interference. It wasn't imagination. Something else was in their home. Something that wanted their child. They tried to seek help. A priest from a nearby church came and blessed the apartment, sprinkling holy water in each room. For a short while, the air felt lighter, calmer. The voices stopped. Lucy slept peacefully. Emily thought maybe they had finally rid themselves of it, but peace never lasted long. One evening, 2 weeks after the blessing, Daniel was alone in the apartment with Lucy while Emily went to the grocery store. He sat in the living room, the monitor on the table beside him, when suddenly it crackled to life. This time there was no static, no distortion. Just a single voice, clear as day. "Daniel, don't let her out of your sight." He froze, staring at the monitor. "What do you mean?" he whispered, though he didn't know why he spoke out loud. The voice responded instantly. "They're already here." At that very moment, Lucy began to scream from the nursery. Daniel bolted down the hall, slamming the door open. The lights flickered wildly, and for a split second he saw shapes, shadows, standing around the crib. He swung the bat, shouting, his heart pounding. The shadows scattered like smoke, dissolving into the air, but the cold remained, biting through his skin. He grabbed Lucy, holding her close, swearing that whatever it was, he would not let it take her. But in the back of his mind he knew. This wasn't over. The voices would return. The shadows would return. And each time they seemed stronger, bolder, less afraid of being noticed. Emily and Daniel began to realize the truth they had been avoiding. Their daughter wasn't just hearing voices through the monitor. She was the reason the voices were there at all. Emily and Daniel could not ignore it anymore. They had tried replacing the monitor, blessing the apartment, even spending nights away at Daniel's brother's house, but the voices always returned. Sometimes they followed them, whispering faintly through the new monitor even when it was plugged in across town. It was clear the problem wasn't with the device. One cold January morning, after another sleepless night of whispers and cries, Emily sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old property records on her laptop. Daniel had already left for work, his face pale and drawn from exhaustion, and Lucy was napping in the living room. The radiator hissed, the wind rattled the glass, but still Emily felt the same oppressive heaviness she had felt every day since the voices began. The building was old, built in the 1920s. Several families had lived there over the decades, and as Emily dug deeper, she found small mentions of strange incidents. A child who died mysteriously in 1949. A tenant who vanished without a trace in the early 1970s. A line from an old newspaper article describing the building as cursed. Her stomach turned as she read one particular report. In 1985, a young couple had claimed to hear voices over their baby monitor. They had moved out after only 6 months. The article didn't go into detail, but Emily didn't need more. She knew now that she and Daniel weren't the first. That night, she shared what she found. Daniel listened quietly, his jaw tight. "So what does that mean? That we're living in some kind of magnet for ghosts?" He said the word reluctantly, as if speaking it made it real. Emily looked at him with tired eyes. "Maybe it's not the apartment. Maybe it's Lucy." Daniel wanted to dismiss it, but deep down he had felt the same. The voices were always centered on her. Always speaking about her, to her, around her crib. The days blurred together after that. They both returned from work each evening with dread. Dinner was eaten quickly, without conversation. Every night was a battle to keep Lucy calm, to keep themselves calm, to keep the monitor on but not too close. Some nights, Emily left it unplugged, convincing herself that if she couldn't hear the voices, maybe they weren't there. But Lucy would always wake at exactly 3 in the morning, crying until her tiny body shook, staring into the same dark corner of the nursery. One evening in late January, Daniel came home later than usual. The apartment was unusually quiet. He set down his keys, listening. No baby cries, no television, just silence. Then he heard it, Emily's voice, faint, coming from the nursery. He walked down the hall slowly, relieved that she had managed to soothe Lucy. But when he opened the door, his blood ran cold. Emily wasn't in the room. Lucy was in her crib, wide awake. And yet from the baby monitor on the dresser, Daniel heard Emily's voice whispering, "Shoo, it's all right, my little one. Don't be afraid." Daniel snatched the monitor, staring at it in horror. The whisper continued, exactly like his wife, until it slowly shifted, warping into something deeper, colder. The last words it spoke before fading were, "She belongs with us." Daniel dropped the monitor, his hands shaking. He scooped up Lucy and carried her to the living room, waiting for Emily to return from the store. When she finally walked through the door 10 minutes later, he nearly collapsed with relief. She looked at him with confusion when he told her what had happened. "You're saying my voice came through the monitor?" she asked quietly. "It wasn't you," Daniel muttered, holding Lucy tightly. "It sounded like you at first, but then it wasn't." The fear in Emily's eyes mirrored his own. That night, neither of them spoke much, but the decision was made without words. They needed help, real help. The next day, Emily contacted a paranormal investigator she found online, a man named Robert Ellis. He arrived 2 nights later with equipment, cameras, voice recorders, and devices Emily had never seen before. He was calm, professional, but his eyes scanned the apartment as though he could already sense what lingered there. He set up a recorder in Lucy's room, leaving the monitor on as usual. For hours they sat in the living room waiting. The baby finally fell asleep, the storm outside tapping against the window panes. At first there was nothing but static. Then, at precisely 3:07 a.m., the voices began again. "Do you hear us?" one whispered. "Yes, we hear you," another replied. Robert leaned forward, his recorder picking up every sound. "Who are you?" he asked quietly into the air. There was a pause and then a distorted response. "She knows us." Emily's hand trembled as she reached for Daniel. Robert remained calm, but his voice was firmer now. "Why are you here? What do you want with the child?" The reply came in fragments, overlapping, almost like several voices speaking at once. "She belongs to us. She was promised. You cannot keep her." The room grew colder, their breaths visible in the air. Lucy stirred in her crib, whimpering, and then the monitor screeched with static so loud it made them all flinch. The recorder captured it all. When the silence returned, Robert turned to them with a grave expression. "This is not just residual energy. These are intelligent presences. They know who you are. They know your daughter." Emily clutched Lucy tightly, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do? How do we stop it?" Robert hesitated before answering. "You may not be able to stop it, but you can try to understand why they are here." Over the next week, he returned nightly, gathering recordings, asking questions, documenting everything. Each night the voices grew bolder. Sometimes they mocked Daniel, repeating his words back at him. Sometimes they whispered lullabies in Emily's own voice to confuse her. And always they spoke of Lucy. One night, when Robert played back the recording, Emily nearly fainted. Among the whispers, a clear sentence emerged. "We had her before you." The implication was unbearable. Emily and Daniel began to argue, both exhausted, both terrified. Daniel suggested leaving the apartment for good, but Emily insisted that whatever it was would follow them. Robert agreed. "This is not tied to the building. It is tied to her." As February deepened, the activity reached a breaking point. Doors slammed by themselves, lights flickered constantly, and Lucy began to develop strange patterns of sleep, waking at the exact same times, staring at things no one else could see. One night, Emily woke to find her daughter sitting up in the crib, humming a lullaby she had never taught her. The same tune she had first heard through the monitor months ago. The final straw came one early morning when Daniel woke to find the monitor on the floor, its green light blinking rapidly. He picked it up, and the voice that came through chilled him more than anything before. "Daniel, give her to us and it will stop." The voice was not distant this time. It was inside his head, as if someone stood right behind him. He dropped the device, clutching his temples, gasping for breath. When Emily rushed in, she found him pale, trembling, Lucy crying in her arms. He whispered, "They're not asking anymore. They're demanding." From that moment, Daniel and Emily knew they were running out of time. They began to search desperately for answers, combing through history, old news reports, even contacting former tenants. Some replied with vague warnings, others refused to speak at all. One woman finally agreed to meet Emily in a cafe across town. She was older, with tired eyes, and when Emily told her about the voices, the woman simply nodded. "It happened to me too," she said quietly. "We lost our child. He died in his sleep. The doctor said it was natural, but I know it wasn't. The voices came first, just like you said. We moved, but it didn't matter. I still hear them sometimes." Emily left the cafe shaken to her core. She realized then that this wasn't something she and Daniel could easily escape. Back at the apartment, Daniel had begun setting up cameras of his own, determined to catch whatever was haunting them. That night, one of the cameras in the nursery captured something that froze them in place. A shadow leaning over the crib, its form bending and shifting like smoke. And on the audio, faint but undeniable, the same words echoed again. "She belongs with us." In the end, Emily and Daniel could not escape the truth. The voices were not bound to the apartment, nor the city of Chicago. They were bound to Lucy. Desperate, the couple left their home, moving to a quiet house 3 hours outside the city. They prayed for silence, for peace, for a chance to live without the constant fear of what lurked in the shadows. For the first few nights it seemed to work. The monitors were quiet, Lucy slept without stirring, and the house felt calm. But on the 7th night, just after 3 in the morning, the familiar static returned. The voices came through as they always had, clearer than before, as if they had followed them step by step. "She's here. We told you, you cannot keep her." Emily clutched Daniel's hand, tears streaming down her face. He stared into the dark, his jaw tight, knowing there was no escape. They could leave houses, cities, even countries, but the voices would never let go. Lucy stirred in her crib, her eyes opening wide, and for the first time she spoke a word, soft and unmistakable. "They're here." The monitor crackled once more, then fell silent. And from that night forward, Daniel and Emily knew one terrible truth. This was not a haunting of a place, but a haunting of a life. A haunting that would follow them forever.